Section 1. The first step in reclaiming your life, your dignity, and your inner power is not to gently reform what's broken. It's to burn it down completely. The part of you that's been operating from fear, seeking approval, avoiding discomfort, saying yes when you mean no, that part must die. Not with drama, not with spectacle, but with the calm, deliberate force of someone who knows the truth. If you do not destroy the old you, it will quietly destroy your potential. You sit in silence, maybe in your room, maybe at the edge of your bed or alone on a nighttime walk, and you ask yourself, not what do I want, but rather what am I still clinging to that's already expired? The version of yourself that laughs too loudly to fit in, that hides your opinions, so no one gets offended, that accepts mistreatment, because conflict feels terrifying. This is not you. This is a mask you've been trained to wear out of survival. But survival is not living. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." You think you're being nice. You think you're being flexible. But really, you've handed the reins of your life to anyone who shows you crumbs of attention. It's not humility. It's a slow erosion of self-respect. Marcus Aurelius knew this too well. As emperor, he sat among generals and senators who flattered him, tried to manipulate him, sought favor. Yet he returned again and again to his inner fortress. He wrote to himself, "Lost no more time arguing what a good man should be one." He didn't ask the world for permission to improve, he demanded it of himself. Imagine that. A ruler of an empire still believing that the work of the self is urgent. Still believing that integrity is not inherited. It is built daily through struggle, through solitude, through destruction and reconstruction. And here you are caught between who you were and who you might become. You wonder if it's too late, if the damage is too deep. But listen closely. The deeper the break, the stronger the rebuild. Scholars still debate whether the Stoics believed in personality the way we do today. Some argue that Stoicism was never about fixed identity. It was about choosing the kind of character you wish to become moment by moment. So who do you choose to be now? Let go of the myth that you'll grow by tweaking small habits, while keeping all your old attachments intact. The old you, the reactive one, the insecure one, the overthinking one, that version has been tested. It has failed. Now you decide, do you keep putting life energy into reviving something that's already died, or do you build something better from the ashes? This isn't about ego. This isn't revenge. This is responsibility. It is the highest calling of your mind to build a version of yourself that can endure storms and still offer peace to others. But that process doesn't start with self-love. It starts with self-honesty. Brutal, courageous honesty. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. To understand this better, let's go back to an ancient lesson from Marcus Aurelius. You're walking through a Roman corridor. The stone is cold underfoot. The night is quiet, the sky black, but inside you, the fire is beginning. Section 2. You don't rebuild yourself with applause. You rebuild yourself in silence, in the private space between failure and persistence, in the nights when no one sees you choosing discipline over impulse, in the mornings when the world still sleeps, but you've already decided who you will no longer be. To destroy the old self, you must first identify its roots. Where did you learn to shrink yourself so others could feel tall? Where did you decide that your emotions must always be soothed by someone else? At what point did you agree that loyalty meant tolerating betrayal? You sit with these questions not to blame the past, but to bury it. Seneca once wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." You've been trying to start over without ending the old chapters. That's why the same people keep showing up. That's why the same pain keeps resurfacing. That's why the new version of you never fully arrives. You keep returning to the battlefield of your habits and losing because you have not changed your armor. You are still using old beliefs to fight new wars. And each time you give someone another chance, you give the old you another day to live. Marcus Aurelius faced this tension too. He ruled with justice but never surrendered his clarity. He forgave, but he did not forget his role. His journal reminds you the best revenge is not to be like your enemy, not to mirror their cruelty, not to retaliate with venom, but also not to let them re-enter the sacred space of your mind. That's where the rebuild begins in your standards. You decide that your time is too precious to be spent explaining your worth. You decide that your mood is not a playground for someone else's immaturity. You decide that your energy will no longer be poured into repairing what was designed to collapse. And this is where Stoicism enters not as a cold shield, but as a warm fire. It reminds you that strength is not shouting over your pain. It's knowing that your peace is not negotiable, that your growth is not dependent on their validation, that your new life will cost you your old one, and that is a price worth paying. Scholars have argued that the Stoic ideal of self-rule could breed isolation, that in detaching from external approval, you might lose connection to others. But ask yourself, were you ever truly connected when you were performing? Was that intimacy or just fear in disguise? You rebuild alone because you must first discover who you are without the noise, without the flattery, without the echo of old wounds telling you what you're allowed to be. The Stoics didn't fear solitude, they used it. They sharpened their minds in it. They prepared for storms by standing quietly in the stillness. You do the same. Let them wonder what happened to you. Let them feel the distance you've created. Let them mislabel your silence as arrogance. You are not here to explain. You are not here to rescue anyone from the consequences of their own behavior. You are here to choose, again and again. Choose power over pity. Choose clarity over confusion. Choose healing over history. The version of you that betrayed your own peace to avoid disappointing others, that version is already gone. Now you stand alone, yes, but also unshaken. For the first time in a long time, your soul starts to feel clean again. And that is worth everything. Section 3. There is a moment quiet but unmistakable when you realize that being unrecognizable is part of healing. When your habits no longer match the version of you that tolerated disrespect, clung to chaos, and called it loyalty. You start noticing it in small things. You don't respond as quickly. You don't over-explain. You walk away sometimes silently and don't feel the urge to return. That's not coldness. That's clarity. And the Stoics would have applauded you for it. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." When you lived to be liked, to be chosen to be praised, your inner world was a hostage. A single text, a single mood swing from another person could collapse your day. Now you're learning that detachment is not cruelty, it's maturity. You walk through your day differently now. There is less tension in your spine when you say no. There's less guilt in your silence, fewer apologies for having boundaries that used to scare you. And yet sometimes loneliness creeps in, not because you miss them, but because the space they left behind hasn't fully healed. Scholars of Stoicism still ask, does the Stoic pursuit of inner power risk creating emotional detachment from humanity? But you're discovering a different truth. Stoicism does not remove emotion, it disciplines it. It does not destroy love, it redefines who is worthy of it. Marcus Aurelius loved deeply his people, his philosophy, even those who wronged him. But he didn't confuse compassion with self-abandonment. In his journals, he reminds himself, "The best way to avenge yourself is to not be like that." You hold that phrase like armor when old memories try to re-enter. You repeat it when temptation whispers that going back is easier than going forward. It's not. Going back means pretending you didn't grow. It means silencing what your soul screamed in solitude, just so someone else can feel comfortable again. That's not peace. That's performance. You catch yourself hesitating when certain names appear on your phone. You feel that tiny tug, the one that says maybe they've changed. But you've changed. And your silence, your space, your stillness, they're proof. You don't answer to destroy them. You stay silent to rebuild you. You no longer fight for someone to understand your worth. Because now your worth is not for debate. It's not a group decision. It's not confirmed by someone choosing you on a good day and ghosting you on a bad one. It's internal, quiet, unshakable. And when the silence stretches long enough, something beautiful happens. The world you feared would abandon you starts shifting in your favor. People who value depth begin to find you. Opportunities that match your integrity appear. You realize that your loneliness was not punishment. It was preparation. The old you would have begged for closure, would have written long paragraphs explaining your pain. But you don't speak the language of desperation anymore. You speak the language of presence. And presence doesn't plead. It simply is. You walk past familiar places that once held heartbreak, and they feel smaller. Not because they changed, but because you did. You carry yourself like someone who's done asking to be seen. And when they finally text you out of nowhere expecting the version of you they used to control you, hesitate for a moment. Not because you're unsure, but because your peace now holds more weight than their curiosity. And in that sacred pause, you realize you have already replied. Section 4. There's a distinct silence that comes not from absence, but from completion. A silence not empty, but full of answers you don't need to ask anymore. You sit in a quiet room. No background noise, no buzzing phone. Just your breath and the awareness that you've finally outgrown something that once defined you. It didn't happen in a single moment. No epiphany or dramatic goodbye. Just one small, consistent act of self-respect after another. And that's where your transformation began. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." So you watch your thoughts now. You no longer allow them to spiral into scenarios that belong to the old you, the one who needed others to validate what you were worth. Now your thoughts have boundaries. Your emotions have structure. Your reactions, once raw and immediate, are tempered by a deep inner filter. Is this mine to carry? Many would say rebuilding yourself alone is lonely, but Stoicism suggests it's essential. The paradox in isolation, you find union with your truest self. The Stoics weren't hermits, but they believed that self-sufficiency was the foundation of strength. Even when Marcus ruled an empire, he carried a personal journal not for the crowd, but for himself. Because growth is never performed. It's practiced slowly, often in silence. You begin to see the difference between solitude and abandonment. One is chosen, the other is inflicted. You chose this, and now you protect it. People ask why you stopped chasing, why you stopped explaining why you're so quiet now. They assume you're cold. They don't know you're calm. They assume you're bitter. They don't see your discipline. Because for the first time you understand, not everyone who hurt you was confused. Some knew. Some enjoyed the power. Some fed on your loyalty like it was weakness. And when they reach out again, after the silence, after you've grown, they don't come to apologize. They come to test. Your silence is not their invitation, it's your confirmation. You walk past the places where you used to wait for them. You glance at your past self as if watching a younger sibling full of hope trying so hard to be enough. You whisper to that version of you. You didn't need to earn love. You just needed to love yourself enough to leave. That's what this silence gave you. Seneca posed the question, what is freedom? He answered it simply, not being a slave to anything, not your anger, not your past, not the opinions of others, not even the seductive comfort of being chosen again. You hold your phone in your hand. You read their message. They say they miss you. They hope you're well. You wonder if they typed that before texting 5 others. And then without fanfare, you delete it. Not because you're hurt, because you're healed. That version of you, the one who would have replied immediately, who would have written paragraphs, who would have rearranged your day to feel wanted, again that version is gone. And no one mourns their own rebirth. So you remain still. You return to your breath, to your ritual, to your journal, where you write not for them, but for you. And in this quiet, you smile. Because this silence, it's not punishment, it's power. Section 5. You wake up before the sun rises. The air is still heavy with possibility. In this silence, there's a question you ask yourself, not out loud, not even in thought. It lingers like incense in a Roman temple. Who do I want to be today? Not who others expect. Not who you were yesterday. You light a candle, or maybe it's just the soft glow of your phone screen, but you don't reach for messages. You don't check if they've noticed your silence. Because you're not waiting anymore. You're building. And builders don't ask for applause between bricks. Marcus Aurelius reminds you, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. So you inspect your habits. The way you react to criticism, the way you crave recognition, the way you speak when you feel insecure. These things are not wrong. They're just not yours anymore. There was a time when you twisted your personality to fit people who didn't even stay. You became agreeable to avoid conflict pleasing, to avoid abandonment, loud to feel visible. Now you've learned that silence doesn't mean being invisible. It means being invulnerable. You go back to basics. You cook for yourself. You move your body. You read old texts as if they were written for your future. The version of you that once cried quietly, refreshing the chat window, hoping they would say something meaningful, that version now holds the silence like a sword. They text again. This time with more urgency. You don't open it. You're no longer interested in replies that come from boredom. You used to think people changed. Now you know they reveal. Over time, what was hidden becomes habit. And if they showed you disregard, once they'll show it again. The Stoics believed that pain is not in the thing itself, but in your judgment of it. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, Seneca warned. So you stop replaying the betrayal. You stop inventing new angles to justify what happened. You don't need to understand why someone chose to hurt you. You only need to understand why you no longer need to give them access. Scholars debate whether Stoicism advocates for emotional detachment or emotional discipline. The difference is subtle but vital. You're not erasing your feelings, you're elevating them. You feel the sting of betrayal, but you don't become the pain. You observe it, journal it, let it pass like a storm over marble columns. Your strength isn't that you don't care anymore. It's that you care differently. You care about your peace more than being right, about your direction more than your desire, about your energy more than their explanation. Rebuilding yourself means disappointing people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. It means hearing your own voice clearly without their opinions echoing in your head. It means taking responsibility, not blame, for the life you're about to create. This is your inner temple. No one gets in without reverence. And when they come back, because they always come back not to fix, but to feed on your progress, you greet them with silence. Not out of pride, but clarity. You don't owe explanations to people who ignored your existence. You pour a cup of tea, you breathe deeper, you write one more line in your journal. I no longer fear being alone. I fear losing myself to belong. This is the life, the old you couldn't imagine. And that's exactly why you had to destroy them. Section 6. There's a moment somewhere in the quiet stretch between rebuilding and becoming when the world starts to take notice. You've withdrawn your energy. You've reclaimed your boundaries. You've chosen silence. And now from the shadows of your absence, they reappear. They don't say they're sorry. Not really. They don't name what they did. Not directly. They just check in. A vague message. A subtle like on your story. A harmless emoji, but you know better. This isn't affection. It's a radar ping. And you feel the urge to respond. Maybe not out of love, but out of memory. Because you once thought connection meant survival, but you're wiser now. You've learned what Epictetus warned: if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. They reach. You pause. You reflect. You remember that every response reopens a gate, and not every gate should remain on its hinges. You walk down a cobblestone path in your mind, where Roman statues once stood guard. You imagine Marcus Aurelius there, writing by candlelight in his camp tent, surrounded by soldiers and silence. He was surrounded by noise, expectation, war, but inside stillness, control. You wonder how he didn't lash out, didn't crumble, didn't answer slander with rage. That's when it hits you. True power doesn't scream. It doesn't explain. It doesn't debate the past with those who refuse to grow. So when they text you, you don't respond for closure. You've already closed the door. You don't respond to teach them a lesson. The lesson is your absence. You don't respond to prove you've moved on. Moved on people don't need to prove. You choose silence because you've outgrown conversation with chaos. Because replying would mean stepping back into the version of yourself you buried. Scholars still question whether Stoicism is too rigid, whether it denies the need for emotional reconciliation. But you've begun to understand that it's not about denying grief. It's about not feeding ghosts. There's a difference between healing and reopening. So you take that energy, the one that once typed long paragraphs explaining your worth, and redirect it. You stretch, you read, you write, you build. You choose the reply that echoes louder than words, stillness. Because when they say, "Hey stranger," they're not reaching for your soul. They're testing your progress. They want to know if you're still flammable, if one spark can burn everything you've built. But you don't catch fire anymore. You've become the stone. They'll wonder if you're bitter. You're not. You're better. Not because you've won, but because you've let go of the game. And that's the twist. When you stop seeking revenge, the silence becomes revenge. When you stop explaining, your peace becomes a mirror they can't look into. So you delete the message. Or maybe you leave it there unread, not out of pettiness, but out of proof. You no longer answer old invitations to the version of life you've outgrown. You say nothing, and in that nothing there is power. Section 7. You wake up one morning and something's different. It's not louder, it's quieter. The voices that once circled your mind, the doubts, the critics, the shadows of who they wanted you to be, have faded. Not entirely, but their grip has loosened. This is what healing in solitude looks like. It doesn't always feel heroic. Sometimes it just means drinking tea in silence, saying no without guilt, not responding to energy that feels wrong even if it used to feel familiar. You don't rebuild yourself by proving anything to anyone. You rebuild by ceasing the performance entirely. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." And this is your test. Can you let them misread your silence as weakness while knowing it's your deepest strength? You walk through the city, Rome or something like it, in your imagination. You don't speak much. You're not trying to be mysterious. You've just realized how often people demand words as comfort for their insecurities, not yours. They want the old you, the reactive you, the one who couldn't tolerate misunderstanding. But that version was built on sand. This one, this quieter, slower, more deliberate self, is carved from granite. You remember how Marcus Aurelius endured loss, betrayal, and constant political manipulation. Yet in his meditations, he never once blamed others for his suffering. He returned again and again to this. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. It's seductive at first to use your silence as punishment. But that's not Stoicism. True silence is not a weapon, it's a boundary. It doesn't say, "I'll make you regret this." It says, "I no longer live in that emotional room." Scholars still ask, does Stoicism risk making us too cold, too withdrawn? But maybe the real risk is becoming addicted to noise, to reactions, to the need to always be seen, explained, vindicated. You stop seeking updates on their life. You stop wondering if they miss you. You realize the only update that matters is the one inside you, the rebuilding of a self that no longer needs rescuing. You do the dishes. You stretch. You relearn patience with your own thoughts. You go to bed early. No grand ceremony, no revenge plan, just peace, just repetition. And somewhere in that repetition, you evolve. The kind of evolution they won't notice. Because it won't come in the form of a flashy comeback or a dramatic post. It comes in the form of absence. They'll keep guessing, and you'll keep growing. Because nothing destroys the ego of those who once tried to dominate you more than your total lack of need for them. That's the paradox. You don't seek to destroy their ego, but by refusing to fuel it, you starve it. You don't mean to be intimidating, but by not reacting, you become untouchable. You don't do it to be powerful. You do it because your peace has become sacred. And from that place of reverence, you speak only when necessary. Not to prove, not to correct, just to preserve. So if they wonder what you're doing, this is it. You're becoming the person no one can control. Section 8. You begin to realize that rebuilding yourself isn't a single heroic act. It's 1,000 quiet refusals. You refuse to engage with drama. You refuse to be baited into old emotional spirals. You refuse to speak just to fill silence. Most of all, you refuse to betray yourself ever again. Marcus Aurelius reminds you the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. So now you watch your thoughts like a guardian at the gate. Not to repress them, but to choose them wisely. You don't let old pain masquerade as truth anymore. You sit at the edge of your bed, letting the early light spill through the window. Roam again in your imagination. You picture a young Marcus overwhelmed with the weight of the empire, pausing before his scrolls, reminding himself that stillness is not laziness. Stillness is preparation. Your stillness is not for show. It is armor. It is fuel. It is how you no longer hand over your dignity just to be seen. Some will misunderstand this new version of you. They'll say you've changed. that you've become distant, closed off. But they never noticed your spirit when it was burning just to keep their coldness warm. They don't get a say now. Scholars often ask, is Stoicism a form of self-isolation? A retreat from the emotional world? But what they overlook is that Stoicism doesn't deny emotion. It simply refuses to let emotion drive the chariot. You still feel, you still hurt. But now you don't perform the pain. You acknowledge it in solitude. You journal. You observe. You walk it off beneath the weight of your own reflection. That is strength, not in resistance, but in regulation. You used to respond quickly. Now you pause. You used to explain everything. Now you let the silence speak. You used to need closure. Now you understand some stories were meant to end without applause. And when they reach out again, the ones who once broke you, you don't fantasize about revenge anymore. You don't need the upper hand. You're not playing that game. You're not even in that arena. You're standing in a field of your own making. When Marcus lost loved ones, he didn't demand justice from the world. He looked inward. He asked, "What am I training myself to become?" And that's the same question you now hold. Not why did they do this to me, but what do I do with what's left? So you train. You train your mouth not to speak recklessly. You train your mind not to spiral uselessly. You train your posture, your focus, your sleep, your mourning. Because every time you choose discipline over reaction, you heal a piece of yourself they tried to break. They don't need to know this. They never will. This transformation is yours. And perhaps the most stoic act of all is to never need them to witness it. Section 9. It's easy to fall back into the person you once were. The over-explainer, the people-pleaser, the quiet tolerator of loud disrespect. But that person was built on survival, not wisdom. You survived what they did to you. But now it's time to do more than survive. It's time to thrive in silence. The Stoics didn't crave sympathy. They craved alignment with reason, with virtue, with inner strength. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. So you look not at the wound, but the response. You've learned that healing isn't loud. It doesn't demand to be seen. You walk a different road now, a narrower one. Not because you're better, but because you're finally ready to walk alone with your values and no crutches. There's a kind of haunting in solitude, but also a kind of freedom. The freedom to hear your own thoughts clearly. The freedom to make decisions without influence. The freedom to protect your peace like a sacred temple, not a crowded market where anyone can walk in. Still, there's temptation. The past knocks. It sends messages. It posts memories. It pretends it never happened. But you don't respond from emotion. Not anymore. You respond with your posture, with your absence, with your self-control. And that burns louder than anything you could ever say. Marcus Aurelius had to navigate betrayal within his own court. Trusted advisors who sought their own interests, senators who conspired, soldiers who turned. But in meditations, he rarely names them. He reflects instead on his own mind, how to remain unaffected, how to remain composed. You model that now. When they message you after months of silence, you don't draft clever replies. You don't weaponize silence for revenge. You use it for peace. If you do respond, it's with grace measured, indifferent, rooted in calm. Not to wound, but to affirm your own boundaries. Scholars still debate, is emotional detachment a denial of humanity, or is it an evolution of it? Stoicism answers with action. Not by being cold, but by being unmoved by those who refuse to meet you in integrity. You don't avoid feelings. You face them. Alone. You journal when you're triggered. You breathe when you're angry. You go for walks when the old sadness creeps in. You don't text them. You don't seek validation. You just pause. That pause is power. That pause is the muscle that Stoicism trains again and again, because now your silence isn't empty. It's full of discipline, full of meaning, full of boundaries. And so the old you slowly dissolves, not with a grand declaration, but with quiet decisions made daily. And the new you rises not with applause, but with quiet dignity, with purpose, with direction, with a heart guarded by wisdom. Section 10. You no longer seek applause. You no longer seek revenge. You seek understanding, and from that, the kind of inner transformation that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The kind Marcus Aurelius hinted at when he wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." You don't preach change, you embody it. It wasn't easy becoming this version of yourself. There were days when the silence felt like suffocation, nights when the urge to explain, to fix, to reconnect screamed louder than reason. But you let it pass. And each time you resisted that familiar urge to defend your name, to please them one more time, to fold in the face of guilt, you grew. This, Epictetus might say, is how you become truly free. Not when the world stops challenging you, but when your responses no longer depend on it. The Stoics remind you that control is internal. You can't stop someone from betraying you. You can't stop a cruel message from being sent or a lie from being believed. But you can control the shape of your soul. You can respond with stillness, or with firm, surgical words, or with no response at all. In this stillness, something beautiful happens. You realize that your energy is finite and you begin to guard it. You no longer explain your worth to those who never saw it. You no longer beg for closeness with those who weaponize your love. You don't give second chances to those who shattered the first with intention. Not because you're bitter, but because you're clear. Scholars still wonder, was Stoicism a philosophy of detachment or engagement? Was it a way to retreat from the chaos or to stand calmly in the storm? The answer lies in this moment, this decision, this boundary. You don't vanish from life. You become immovable within it. And now, you rebuild. Slowly. Not the old self, but a stronger one. A self that doesn't need closure because it already has clarity. A self that doesn't lash out because it already chose peace. A self that doesn't fear being alone because it no longer fears itself. You rise each day with discipline. You journal what you feel and what you want to become. You choose who gets access, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You walk away when needed. You stay silent when it's best. You speak truth only when it strengthens your integrity, not your ego. And through it all, you become untouchable, not in arrogance, but in groundedness. This is your power. This is your path. The quiet rebuilding of a life rooted in Stoic clarity. And no one gets to take that from you, not again.